Welcome to the 2020 Public Health Law Virtual Summit. We have one presentation in this session, and that will be followed by a Q&A. Use the chat feature to submit your questions. If you encounter technical difficulties during the session, go to the navigation menu and select the Need Help button. Now I will turn it over to our first speaker.
Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to the second day of our Public Health Law Virtual Summit. My name is Gene Matthews. The session today is on becoming better messengers, public health messaging in a polarized political environment. If you're not confused, you're not paying attention to what's going on in this country these days. So I am going to share screen and we will go off and run here. We will be trying to take some questions at the end. Let's see, someone else is sharing. I'm going in. Okay. Okay, Dawn or Elizabeth, is the screen, are we showing PowerPoints now?
You're good.
Yep.
Okay, okay, we're good to go. So I'm Gene Matthews. I'm Director for the Southeastern Regional Office Network for Public Health Law. Joining me today is Elizabeth Thomas, who is a Community Engagement Coordinator here at UNC's North Carolina Institute for Public Health, and is a very good communicator and public health trainer. And then Dawn Hunter, who is my Deputy Director here in the Southeastern region, is based out of St. Petersburg, Florida. Previously, she was a state health leader in the New Mexico Health Department, did a lot of work on health equity and public health law, and has joined our team this year and is helping us out a lot. There's a chat box. We will be trying to field some questions at the end. We want to move fairly quickly on this, so I'm gonna forge ahead. Again, if you're not paying attention, we're at a rather remarkable and scary moment in public health. So hopefully, if my little cursor, we've got at least five different factors focusing in on public health right now. Clearly, it's the coronavirus pandemic is stressing us all. That's triggered the economic crisis, which is causing all sorts of disruptions and health disparities as well. The two have then illuminated structural racism and disparities in our country right now, and we're all trying to deal with that. Public health is in the middle of that piece as well. And then with social media, we've essentially polarized our democratic process. So we're having gridlock in government as we try to get public health messages out right now. And then going maybe unaddressed but not unnoticed right now is the climate change issue with the forest fires burning in western United States, and here in the Southeast we've got one hurricane sitting on top of parts of us. It's pouring rain out my window here, and Dawn had a bunch of it in Florida, and we've got 5 tropical storms in the Atlantic Basin right now. So it is quite a busy time to be dealing with these things now. So what I'd like to talk about a little is, today is social media has fueled this political polarization. So it sort of begs the question, how does public health function in this difficult communications environment? or since this is a public health law conference, maybe we can go with how does public health law function in this environment. Scott Burrows, who I think is sitting out in the audience chuckling at this, helped us develop a concept of 5 essential public health law services, because whenever we have to make an adjustment in public health, generally we're having to look at changing a law or regulation, a policy, or get an appropriation, and it involves engaging the political system. And in doing so, we can't do everything at once. We need to pick a policy option to try to get changed. We then need to build the community support necessary to get that law or that regulation passed. And then we need to enforce, defend, and implement that. We need the resources to do it. If we don't have good messages that resonate, we're wasting our time. So I there's a lot of interesting effort going on right now with this. And I put on the screen here something that came out a month ago, the Phrases Toolkit put out by the Frameworks Institute along with the Beaumont Foundation and the Aspen Institute. That is really some brilliant work with deep research on how to do strategic messages, stories from the field, sample documents, resource library. But it's basically a really rigorous look at, in public health, what messages and what phrases seem to work and what do not work. So this is really deep research, but it sort of begs another question, which is why we're here today. And that is, I'd sort of like maybe why do some of these phrases work and other wording does not work? So what we're going to do today is try to step back and just take a few minutes to look at an approach of what's happening at a deeper level in this country, of how we resonate to various values that shapes the way certain messages resonate with us and why others do not. And so that takes us into the work that we've been doing here on becoming better messengers. And all of our content is shown in the link at the bottom of the screen. And as a matter of fact, that's the link that was used at the very end. Many of you took a Moral Foundations Theory self-profile. So I'm going to let Elizabeth join us here and talk a little bit about what the scores were that 6 of you took on this. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Sure, just real briefly, because Jane's going to get into more in depth about what each of these categories means, but almost 70 of you took the online assessment that was sent out prior to today's program, and this assessment is based on the work of Jonathan Haidt and others, which is known as Moral Foundations Theory. And what we're looking at here is the group's aggregate profile. So some of you may have saved your own personal scores. And even if you haven't read anything about Moral Foundations profiles or didn't know anything about what any of this means, I think you could kind of make some quick judgments about what y'all as a group are like. And that would probably be that you're lovely people who care about fairness and fairness, who value care and fairness highly, and who maybe don't resonate as much with authority and loyalty. And there's no value judgment really attached to that. It's really more about what do you resonate with naturally and strongly, and what where your blind spots might be. What's really important here from a communication standpoint is what's going to come easily to you as communicators, and where do you just need to strengthen your communications muscles. Public healthers in general tend to be great at communicating around the values of care and fairness. And so as a public health audience, I'm not surprised by these scores, but As you'll learn from Jane, you actually probably going to do better than you would expect on the other values. And so you need to just pay attention to those values where you may not have scored as highly, and think about how you can speak to audiences that do score more highly on those values naturally.
Okay. And I'd like to give a shout out right now also to Barbara Martin, who is a doctoral student here at UNC, who's doing a dissertation on this work. And she helped us with putting together some of these tables and these ways of doing a profile electronically of an audience. So we will come back to this in just a minute about what these values are. But let me just you know, again, put a slide up that demonstrates the blindingly obvious. This is from Axios about a year ago, but the numbers are still pretty close, that 67% of us in this country are in the exhausted majority with respect to the political food fight that's going on. And most of what we're hearing in the media, on TV, in social media, etc., are driven by a small percentage from the liberal and the conservative ends of the spectrum who are screaming at each other. And it is very difficult for public health to penetrate in this environment. So I sort of want to step back, and this is work that was done by Jonathan Haidt in a book in 2012 called The Righteous Mind, in which he sort of founded this field of moral foundation theory that a lot of public health researchers and communicators are looking at now. And it's, you know, based on a fairly common sense understanding that our social and political judgments are particularly intuitive. And most of the time, we're not aware. 90% of the time, it's the intuitive elephant that is leaning one way or another. And our rational brain is a little person up on the top of the elephant, sensing which way the elephant is leaning, and then making up rationalizations for why we want to go left or go right, thinking that it is our rationality that's driving this. But it's not. A lot of this is evolutionary moral psychology that is not, it's intuitive, and we're not aware of it when we're doing it. So what Haidt did was establish and tease out 6 different foundational values that we all resonate to. And each one of these values has a reciprocal to it. So for example, care is about the compassion for those that are vulnerable. And also the reciprocal is the intolerance, a righteous indignation of those who are having to needlessly suffer. So that's a care value that we all resonate to some degree. Liberty and oppression. Liberty, again, is about the freedom of choices and actions. And we want to have this freedom from the time our ancestors wandered out onto the Serengeti plain. And the reciprocal is we are intolerant of bullies. You know, Jane Goodall's work on chimpanzees showed rather dramatically that bullies are quickly driven right out of the tribe because it's too disruptive to the functioning of a group. Fairness and cheating, people want to be treated fairly. They want to get what they deserve. And we are socially intolerant of the free riders that are wanting to get something for nothing. Loyalty and betrayal is the personal trust, the group identity. And in this world of social media, with a click of a mouse, our group identity can shift from our family to our neighborhood, to our region, to our state, to our football team, to our university, who knows what. We move back and forth rather quickly now, but we identify strongly with our groups, and we socially isolate those who betray our group. It's this hardwired in us. Authority and subversion, it's the competitive advantage of organized groups. This is Alexander the Great saying when he took over a country, he did not enslave them. He said, come on and be part of my big red team and be part of us, and we'll go on and take more territory and become richer and better. And so there's a competitive advantage of groups with good leaders and versus those that are simply tribal anarchists. And we're not tolerant of those to subvert the system. And finally, sanctity and degradation. This is also part of the human spirit that's elevated and pure. It's about these transcendent moments that we all feel at births and deaths and weddings and graduations and so forth, where we exhibit altruistic values for the betterment of the group over our own individual betterment. And so part of our human spirit resonates to this. And we are reciprocally, we avert ourselves to personal degradation, to habitual behavior that is degrading to our human spirit. So that's the really quick fire hose approach to those 6 values that you just got graded on that took the self-profile. So here's what the breakthrough that Jonathan Haidt did. He found that these values could all be reliably measured. And he found a striking difference in the US population between how political liberals and political conservatives resonate to these values. And so I'm gonna go into that because that really takes us to something about how we in public health speak to our divided communities now. The liberal moral matrix, for those that sort of identified as liberals, the overarching value is to help those in need, heavy on caring of the weak, preventing harm, focusing on rights and fairness of outcome. And liberals tend to be less resonating towards loyalty, authority, and sanctity, okay? Now, conversely, or maybe not conversely, but interestingly, US political conservatives, their overarching value is to preserve the norms and treasured institutions. They also resonate more to those first 3 values of care, liberty, and fairness, but even more to these institutional values of loyalty, authority, and sanctity. So if you put these 2 slides together, you get something that Haidt calls the conservative advantage. And so what I'm doing, if people are visually challenged about the colors, the liberal bars in each one of these pairs is on the left side, and the conservative bar is on the right. So you can see the blue shading of the conservatives is sort of trending downward, and the liberal, the conservative values are pretty much the same, higher on loyalty, authority, and sanctity. But it sets up a really, really interesting dynamic. First of all, US liberals are genuinely surprised that conservatives score high over here, this high on care, liberty, and fairness. Liberals understand that they score lower on loyalty, authority, and sanctity, but they're a little puzzled or challenging that this data isn't there. Why could conservatives care a hoot about care, liberty, and fairness? Well, they actually do. That gets you to the second insight here, is that conservatives are not surprised that the liberal values are like they're showing here. And they're not surprised. Conservatives well understand this is a true representation of their value profile. And in addition, they understand that liberals misread conservatives on these first three values. Now, this is important for us in public health that are trying to reach out across the communities, because not only is this what Haidt says in political terms, that he's stunned how US political liberals get anywhere when they're basically only playing with 3 cards in a 6-card deck. What this helps us in public health is that as you took the exam, the self-profile, public health community generally scores higher over here than traditional liberals on this, even though public health speaks in the doctrinal terms of doctrinal liberals. When I was all my years at CDC, when we're trying to message vaccine or opioids or obesity or environmental issues, I think public health just naturally gravitates towards framing its issues around care, liberty, and fairness. And when we open our mouth, we're in some cases missing 50% of the US population. So if you look back at how a public health audience does, this is one we're tracking the North Carolina public health workforce. And their profile is pretty much like yours were, with these higher values over here on loyalty, authority, and sanctity, still high on care and liberty. But it provides an important insight here that sometimes you surprise yourself. And in this case, if you do a 2x2 matrix of what you're aware of versus what you really do or don't know, that we tend to fall in this block 4 here of knowing something, but not being aware that we knew it. So that's the real key to this, and it gives us a public health advantage. I will stipulate for the record, and based upon the information that you just showed in the foundational self-assessment you did, that most public health people can articulate public health in care and social justice and using equity. But we also resonate to loyalty, authority, and sanctity. The heart of public health is community coalition building. This is what we do. And with respect to authority, public health is generally a 10th Amendment police power doctrine reserved to the states, with some powers also applying at the national level. It's police power. We will quarantine your ass. We do food inspection. We do sanitation. All of this stuff is part of the police power doctrine of public health, which we're sometimes a little squeamish to claim, but when we have to, we do. And then finally, sanctity is the nobility of public health. While others are running away from the fire, we run towards Ebola. We run towards coronavirus, and this is what we're doing. So this gives us an advantage to be a better messenger. So public health is, get my things going here. So public health works with the community and needs these civil conversations to occur in order to do what it is we do. But in doing so, we can also add value to that community dialogue going on. So civil discourse is vital to public health. I submit to you that public health can reach across the political spectrum in a way to engage all of our communities on this. And so I'm going to pass this over to Elizabeth to talk a little bit more about empathy. And if you want to, I will stop sharing my screen and let Elizabeth jump in, take it away. And while Elizabeth is booting up, let me just say again, mind the chat box if you can find it. I'm not finding it right now, but I'm sure it'll occur somewhere. And we will try to move rapidly and get some questions that will we can address towards the end of the hour. Elizabeth, you're up.
All right, and let's see. All right, are you seeing the correct screens, or are you seeing?
Yep, discourse looks like this.
Okay, great. I will get the hang of this one of these days. Thanks. So what if the discourse looks like this? I think a lot of us are really frustrated at the moment, and I will acknowledge that. It's hard to be messaging in an environment where there's a lot of resistance to our messages, and there's a lot of mistrust of our motivations and of our qualifications as public health professionals, and for many of you as lawyers. And it can be really tempting to write off those of us who disagree with us, or who are, or to let ourselves get distracted by internet trolls. But the stakes are really high right now, and I would say that they're too high to be smug or to let our communities down by not trying to connect with them. I like how Jean talks about the exhausted majority, and I would remind us that most of us really are in that exhausted majority. So I think we need to try to take approaches that have an empathetic mindset, and that really try to honor the person that's in front of us as having a rich and valid life history and set of experiences and even training that might lead them to draw different conclusions from our own. And so I think moral foundations theory and taking an empathy approach give us a framework that helps us dig deeply into how other people are thinking and feeling, and then when we're able to understand them, we can start to communicate with them in a language that resonates with them. And people who are resisting our messages, like the people in this photo, are likely feeling really scared. They're feeling concerned about their circumstances and worried about their families. And those are things that we can empathize with. So even if they resonate with the conservative values, they are also probably resonating with these so-called liberal values, like liberty and care and fairness. And we can't just ditch every relationship with somebody who disagrees with us, even if it's tempting. So whether it's our family members at Thanksgiving dinner table or a county commissioner, this person is in our lives, and we try to have the best relationship with them that we can. And then even setting aside relationships from the standpoint of public health, empathy is something that empowers us to be trusted messengers. And I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind, is that we have to uphold and cherish the public's trust. And that's crucial to the long game of public health. And if we're not seen as trustworthy, we don't have anything. If we can achieve that, though, we can really get far, even with people who don't agree with us. When we are trusted messengers, and seen as having worthwhile messages, there's a good chance that we'll win people over eventually, even if it takes a long time. So how do we take the first step in that conversation? I think that falls on us. We can only control ourselves. We can't control what other people are thinking and doing, but we can do the hard work of thinking about what we can do with our messages. So we can reframe ourselves and our messages. We can say, what is the person in front of me thinking? Might they be feeling scared? Might take a look at our liberal messages and think, are they feeling oppressed by us? Are they feeling, that's the flip side of liberty, are they feeling that they are suffering unfairly by the restrictions we're putting on them? Can we have empathy for the care that they're trying to take for their family? I think taking the time to deeply empathize with their situation, it helps us at least see them as human, see people as having a situation that we can empathize with. If you're a small business owner, people are struggling right now, it means that we can take a moment to listen to their concerns and try to build from there. What can I say to this audience or to this person that says that I see them and I respect them, and then how can we connect around common values? The authors of Crucial Conversations have a question that I really like, which is why would a reasonable, rational, decent person do what this person is doing? You could also put it in moral foundations theory language and say, why would a person who values care and fairness do what this person is doing? So reframing is the work that we do within ourselves, and then the communication is the work we do with our public. And so I'd say it's very important to be candid and curious. I really want to emphasize that this is never about trying to manipulate people and try to make them think that we agree with them when we don't. But that is about trying to make sure that our positions are really clear and that we're doing the best job we can to really understand where other people are coming from. And so that means that we're trying to really explain and advocate our positions and give the facts and the data that supports that, and to say that is why I believe what I believe. This is why I believe this is the best option for going forward. But then to also be really curious and genuine and say, what is your perspective? And tell me more about that. And can you give me an example? I also think this is the best way to challenge misinformation and alternative facts and all those kinds of things that we're hearing. We're seeing a lot of disinformation campaigns right now. And I'll go ahead and acknowledge that there are people we are never going to reach, and I'm not talking about those audiences, but I also think that that's a relatively small portion of the general public still at this point. But if somebody has been exposed to some myths, I think the best way to counter that is to keep asking questions and challenge it with a calm, rational perspective. Asking lots of questions is going to be the way forward, and also treating people with respect. If you just say, well, that's stupid, you're not going to reach your audience. And remember, as public healthers, it's our job to lead with empathy and to do this hard work of being better messengers, because we can connect and make progress on these type of issues. I also think it's important to keep in mind that past public health campaigns and also ongoing public health campaigns like campaigns against HIV have had more success when our messages were delivered in ways that resonated with our audiences and not with ourselves, that were human-centric and focused on people's need to connect with each other and to live their lives and not focused on shame. So thinking about what's been successful, it hasn't been fear-based stuff. It's been things that focus on how can you continue to live your life? How can you continue to connect with people? We also need to be humble. We need to admit what we know and what we don't know. We need to admit when we've made mistakes, but also go forward and continue to stand behind our science and be strong and confident about that. And we need to reach out. This is absolutely the time to be making those connections, and that's what Moral Foundations framework is all about, making those empathy connections. And when we see those people who don't want to wear a mask, thinking about why that might be, and not just thinking about, oh my gosh, this person is driving me crazy. And we all have a knee-jerk reaction, or at least I won't make that broad statement, but I'll say I have a knee-jerk reaction when I see somebody who's not wearing a mask in public at this point. It makes me very, very twitchy and often judgmental. But there are also some, I will put a link in the chat to this. There's been some really great writing about reaching people who don't want to wear masks, and maybe that we can't ignore those folks, and that we can look for some of the human-centered reasoning behind some of the thinking there, and that public health can't just write people off with that. good messaging is going to be apolitical and human-centric and warm, and a little bit less behavior and shame-based, and more about harm reduction and building a sense of community. And the reason I have this add up is it's from the North Carolina DHHS's COVID response team's latest campaign, and the campaign is called Get Behind the Mask. And I think it's a great example, one of many. There's a lot of ads in the campaign that are focused on whatever your reason, get behind the mask. And they're all very person focused. They're less focused on sort of scientific reasoning and more focused on getting to work, protecting your family. You could be from any side of the political spectrum and really find something to connect with in these ads. And I just really like them. So if you're looking for some examples of messaging that I think are really effective, I would encourage you to check out this website. So Jean, I'll keep my screen up if you want me to just tell you.
Yeah, if you just advance to the next slide, and there'll be 2 more advances after that. Just, yeah. Okay. So just, and thank you, Elizabeth, for all the work that you're doing on trying to approach this using empathy and active listening and all of the other techniques that we're trying to learn. There's deeper training that we're doing. We can't do it today in this 1-hour amount of time, but we're experimenting certainly heavily here in North Carolina on doing different ways of skill building training for our workforce. And we can teach in a workshop type session, even virtually, how to frame your particular individual issue that will resonate with the 6 different foundational values. And it's very much an advantage. The big aha, we've been working on this for a long time, thinking about it's important for reaching decision makers and policy makers. But we've also found that this is very useful to frontline public health workers who are out in a community and they begin the morning in a white conservative rural area of the county, and by the evening they're in a rather upscale community area on the outskirts of a metropolitan area. And in between, they're spending part of the middle of their day in a brown community and a black community. And they're saying, we need a Rosetta Stone to figure out how to do this. So this is a worksheet. If you want to advance the slide, one click. Yeah. We can do this for any issue. This is one we just did with the workshop on coronavirus about how you can frame coronavirus messaging around care, around liberty, and around fairness. And this is pretty easy for public health workforce audiences to do. But flip on down to the next slide. We also really start with a group training to build the skills on how you frame public health around loyalty, authority, and sanctity. And you can see some examples on the screen, but there are a lot of you that have logged into this. I'm getting nervous, and I'm sure there are questions coming in. So I want to move on with this. We're developing different ways of doing this training. Reach out to us at the network if you're interested, and we'll see what we can do. But at this point, I will stop back. If you want to shift the control of the screen over to Dawn to finish us up. And again, I see questions coming out in the chat box. So put them in and we'll try to do all that we can in the time available. And Dawn, up to you. You're muted. Dawn,
Okay.
you're muted.
I should be unmuted now, I hope.
Yeah.
Okay. I flipped my screen around and then lost my unmute button, but hello. And I'm glad to get to talk here at the end. I'll be watching the time to make sure that we have some time for questions. And it's nice to see that both Jean and Elizabeth have touched on some things that we heard yesterday in the opening plenary. And I think you'll hear a little bit more of that now. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the importance of censoring equity in public health messaging. And I'm going to talk about what that means and why it's important, and dive into some important audience considerations, as well as provide some guidelines for creating a narrative, including tips on language to use. And then I'm going to end with a discussion of the importance of community with a capital C. So I want to start here by pointing out this quote from the Frameworks Institute on the right-hand side and pointing out the concept of naming and framing. It's important to name a thing in order to address it head on, but how we frame the conversation can impact the willingness of people to accept the message, and it may actually reinforce negative stereotypes that people have about vulnerable communities. This can apply to conversations about racial equity, but also to other population groups, like people living in poverty or living with disabilities, or even gender disparities, and of course, the intersections of those groups. Censoring equity means that you are thinking about health equity in either the content of the message or as an outcome of the message. Content might be focusing on the need for COVID-19 testing in a community that is at greater risk, whereas outcome might be framing a message about a public meeting to discuss the distribution of CARES Act funds for small businesses in your community. Keeping equity at the forefront and developing your messaging is important because it promotes equity in your community. It normalizes conversations, which we are seeing now in talking about racism. And you are reaching people where they are, both literally and figuratively, and reaching the widest audience in a way that is relatable. And that's something Elizabeth was also talking about. But these aren't the only reasons that we should censor equity, and I encourage you to think about your own answer to this question. So you may have seen this called the collaboration continuum, which is the top row of terms, or maybe stakeholder management models, which is the bottom row of terms. Either way, messaging is not one size fits all, and you are going to have to tailor your message for the different types of stakeholders that you engage. I myself, and I'm sure others, fall prey to talking about public health like everyone just gets public health. But a lot of people are somewhere in the middle. They're neutral, they're curious, they're aware, they may even be supportive. But you need to have a framework for your message, and then you need to tailor the message to the specific audience you're dealing with. I would point out that Jonathan Haidt does have a TED Talk that's available, and I don't know if Elizabeth mentioned it. She probably did, and it just went out of my head. But at any rate, check it out. I think it's from 2013, and there's a point in that that's really eye-opening to me. And he says, you know, what kind of an audience goes to TED Talks? You know, what kind of group of people gets together with other people who want to change the world? They probably tend to be on the liberal end of the matrix. But the other thing he said is that a lack of moral diversity in the team can lead to problems, because then it limits the kind of solutions and approaches that you're willing to take. So I thought I would point that out because I thought it was really just striking. And when you're creating your narrative, the number one thing you do is lead with values. Start with your message. Start with something that appeals to one of the 6 foundational moral values that we've covered, and they're here on the slide. And that might look like, when one part of our community is in need, we are all affected. Or everyone deserves to work in an environment that is safe and has appropriate protections in place to help prevent the spread of coronavirus. You also want to connect to history. We heard about this in the plenary yesterday as well. The New York Times published an article not too long ago on extreme heat in urban areas that is due to historical discriminatory housing practices. The headline of that article was "How Decades of Racist Housing Policy Leaves Neighborhoods Sweltering." And that's going to tap into another important point that I'll get into on the next slide. Draw a through line to the issue today. So in the previous example, sweltering neighborhoods means communities are more vulnerable to cardiovascular events and respiratory disorders. And this in turn is compounded by COVID-19, making those people more vulnerable. Also be sure that when you're talking about things like housing or transportation, that you draw the connection between public health and these social issues, because it is not obvious to everyone. And finally, focus on solutions. People want to know what can be done, and they want to be part of making it happen. So make sure that your message capitalizes on that. Some other language considerations. Number 1, be authentic. Do not just repeat talking points. And along those lines, always consider literacy levels and access to information in other languages and for people with disabilities. 2, communities respond best when they hear their assets and contributions recognized and the solutions are identified that build on that. And then 3, going back to that New York Times article, you always want to focus on the conditions, in that case, racist housing policy, and not the people, Black and brown people who live in hotter neighborhoods. Finally, be aware of 2 important cognitive biases, especially as public health experts. Authority bias, which means authority figures can be more influential, and the framing effect, which leads people to draw a different conclusion based on how information is presented. This latter can be as simple as a difference between this. Only 24% of current members of Congress are women, versus women make up nearly 24% of current members of Congress. So the last thing, but the most important thing, but I do have one more slide after this, is engaging the community. Community is the most important. We are all part of communities large and small. Work communities, churches, schools, neighborhoods. You heard me say this yesterday as well if you were at the plenary. But lifting up community voices and perspectives means placing value, drawing attention to community problems and community solutions, ensuring that everyone is adequately informed of important information about their health or ways to impact the processes that affect their health, raising awareness, sharing relatable stories that can be connected to their own personal experience, and identifying how public health solutions benefit both individuals and communities. Communities often don't trust the government or institutions. You've also heard that today, but community members do trust each other, and they trust leaders who come from their community and people who can relate to the experiences and the conditions that they live in. Last but not least, I'd like to give thanks to the team that worked on updating the 10 essential public health services, because they very nicely tied everything I was just talking about into this one essential public health service. This was just released on September 9th. And you see highlighted in dark orange, communicate effectively to inform and educate is essential public health service number 3. But the most important update perhaps in this model is that equity is literally at the center of everything. On the right-hand side, you can see some of the things that make up this particular health service on communication, but they're all things that I was just talking about. And I would highlight developing culturally and linguistically appropriate and relevant communications, engaging in two-way conversations. So you're hearing back from the community as much as you're talking to them. And most importantly, making sure communications are asset-based. So I thank you for the opportunity to get to talk a little bit about equity and messaging today. And Jean is going to close us out. And Jean, you're muted.
Try that again. Yeah, we've got, thank you, Dawn. That's really good stuff. And we've got, we're going to have 10 minutes for some questions. Let me close this down. And I'll see questions coming in. Don't forget the chat box. David Naiman just threw a stinker at me, which we'll address in just a minute. I like that one. But this is your shot at it. So the takeaways here. Public health has a vital role to play amid this polarization, okay? We cannot shirk out. Public health tends to shy away from getting involved in the rough and tumble of politics. And there are good reasons, because we're science-based, you know, but it hasn't served us well in this food fight we're in right now. Number two, the public health community cannot afford the luxury of contempt or condescension towards those in our communities who don't happen to share our viewpoints. We serve all our communities, and we have to keep that in mind. It's like the politics are driving me crazy, but I serve all of these people, not just the reds or the blues. And so number three, we need to build the skill sets of our entire workforce in order to change law and policy to meet these many new challenges. And so what we've done is take a little deeper dive as to what's going on that complements the phrases slide that I showed you before, which gives you good hard data on phrases that work and phrases that we don't. I go out with John Lewis. Try to find the goodness in every human being and don't give up on the other person. So I hope this is useful. It's a little bit off the beaten path. Why are lawyers doing this? Because we want to get things done and we need better messengers on this. Dawn, if you want to take the screen back, yeah, we're just, if we could do presenter view. We've got questions. Yes, the slides will be available. Yes, there will be a YouTube copy of this whole session available, hopefully within the next 10 days, because we're counting on it for some other programs that we're doing. And, you know, I sort of look at Bethany Saxon's question in the chat box. And Dawn, you can scout ahead beyond David Naiman if there are any. But, you know, Bethany is saying, we are science driven. It's a process. And how do we function in this? And I totally agree. We cannot, once we give up our scientific credibility, we're just back in the soup with all the rest of the political carnivores swimming around in it. In foundational theory value, the scientific process relates to the authority. There is hard data for what we do. There is credibility and good leadership. People really do want good government, compared, you know, notwithstanding the gridlock that we have right now. So yeah, it is definitely difficult. Once we give up the hard science that brought us here, we're doomed. But we need to build those other skill sets to deal with these issues. Dawn, you or Elizabeth want to jump on that one, and then I'll take a shot at David Naiman here.
I would just add that for those of you who haven't seen it, the Frontline did do a documentary, and I think it was the one entitled Coronavirus What Went Wrong, but it did talk a little bit about messaging. And the one thing that stood out to me from that is if you look at messaging around SARS or Ebola, our people who were in leadership positions were really clear about what the existing science was, and they were also clear that it was going to change. So I think, you know, we just have to constantly be giving accurate information about the process, not just the content, in terms of, you know, how information might evolve over the course of the pandemic. And, you know, it would behoove us to do the same thing for vaccine development and distribution, so people have realistic expectations about what it really means for a vaccine to be available whenever it is and who realistically is going to get it up front. And again, level set expectations, that's going to change depending on the circumstances. So I thought that was a really important message to get across.
Anything, Elizabeth?
Yeah, I mean, I think public health will just do the best that it can in terms of, you know, we can be consistent. I'm not sure that the consistency will happen across the board. But, you know, it's going to be what it will be.
Yeah, so, okay.
Jean, could I add one quick thing?
Absolutely.
I just want to reinforce one of the points that I made in my portion, which is about using trusted leaders from your community. I mean, we already know people don't trust the government, and so we absolutely should not rely on the government to be the one continually giving the message. So if you find people in your faith community, in your county, in your mom group or whatever, that, you know, have that trusted perspective, we as public health professionals should be reaching out to them. And I heard this once told to me, you know, whisper in the ears of our advocates. They're the ones who can carry the message. We don't have to be the ones all the time.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Dawn. I gave into a moment of pessimism just now, and thank you for lifting me right back out of it. Yeah, no, I mean, one of the key things that we always really need to keep in mind with something like this is that it really should be the public health people who are the ones who are communicating in a time like this. And we see this in other countries, you know, it's the public health leaders who are stepping forward. And I'll bring up North Carolina again, actually. You know, Mandy Cohen is the person who's doing the majority of the COVID messaging in our state, not our governor. And she's doing a good job with it. And it should be the community leaders are good people to talk to and to send our messages out through. People who are who have trust and who are doing a good job already of communicating sanely with audiences are good partners right now, and those are good people to reach out to about future messaging for sure. Absolutely. Thank you so much for bringing that up.
So the stinker question from David Naiman. I love it, David. You have proposed solutions for dealing with personal attacks on public health messengers, like public health officials have experienced. And do you think that the current polarized environment that public health officials need to refrain from political involvement, including contributions in order to reach people with whom they politically disagree? Let me take the second part first. You can't do a brain or soul transplant. You are who you are, okay? But when we were starting to do this, it struck me that I think we need to be you give your contributions as you want to and vote as you want to, but we in public health need to be aware of the social media footprint we leave when we are FaceTiming and doing Instagrams and all of that. That never goes away. So then when you're in front of a mixed audience politically and you're saying things and they're sitting there with their Googling you up and looking at what you said on FaceTime or Facebook, no, I mean, you are undercutting your credibility. So you have to make your own decisions about the path you want to walk. That's part of it. Now, the other thing about the attacks on the messengers, as I said before, over the last year, 2 years, public health has simply become weaponized by the political extremes, and we're having to deal with it. We're watching it today with the stories playing out of CDC, and it's very painful to watch. I think part of it relates back to that training and what I said before to Bethany. Public health needs to improve its political skill sets better than our colleagues down the hall in governance, in transportation, or education, or agriculture, or whatever. They're much more skilled at dealing with the political game. We tend to shade back from that because we're science-based. But, Bill Foege, the legendary CDC director that hired me, said every public health decision is a political decision. And most political decisions are public health decisions. So we cannot be isolated from it. It comes with the territory, but it's the building our political skill set, not with the big P, but with the little p. And hopefully what we're talking about today gives you some insight into that. Do not give up on the other person, as John Lewis says. And then finally, regarding the attacks, yes, I don't have time yet in the 5 minutes to dig it up, but we can post. We're in the southeastern region. Our eastern region of the network with Kathleen Hoke is doing collaborations on exactly that issue of a playbook to give for health officials who are being personally attacked for giving out the messages which they're supposed to give. And again, we can give you that link, or Kathleen Hoke, if you go to our website and look up our Eastern region based out of Baltimore, we're putting up materials on that very shortly if it's not already up. So I'm out. We got less than 5 left. On who we got up here?
We have one comment and one question, and I think we're at time. I just want to read the comment from Catherine Gallagher. Thank you for this presentation. It is so helpful, particularly working in government and dealing with quickly shifting science, policy decisions, pandemic planning, and crafting messaging strategy for essential versus non-essential workers. As we are midway in the response, some have never stopped performing service-oriented jobs and question why them, and others are returning to work now and asking why them. This is really good information. So thank you. And then the last question, which probably could be a rapid fire, how do you engage? Oh, do we get stopped? No. How do you engage with mainstream and alternative media to promote public health messages? And after we answer this, we will let you all go.
Repeat again, how do we engage both
mainstream and alternative media to promote public health messages?
Oh, okay. The mainstream media right now, I don't know. I give it the serenity prayer. It is very difficult between now and the election and the, whatever happens there after that, to penetrate that food fight going on. Count me in the exhausted majority. But we need to keep doing what it is we're doing. Regarding the social media, then that is where, if you go to our website, we've got this brilliant work that two millennials have done for us on crafting richer messages and how this works with millennials. Colleen Healy-Bufides, who's with our Mid-States region, and Lizzie Corcoran, formerly with de Beaumont, now with the DC government, have done brilliant work on how this messaging resonates with the new workforce. And clearly, it is not the dinosaurs that are going to figure out how to do the messaging with the media, with social media. It is for you to lead the way. So please lead us to that. That's my thesis on it. Elizabeth and Don?
I would just say, the importance of social media toolkits and connecting to national days of action for whatever the issue is. For example, pre-plug, we're going to be doing something for National Voter Registration Day next week. But yeah, just giving people the tools to then take over social media with messages that resonate with them. And so we're not the ones who are managing the conversation all day. We're saying, hey, here's some really great information you could put out there, and we would love it if you use your platform and your connections to help spread the word.
Elizabeth?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that we could talk about for a really long time. So I'll just say it's something that you don't have to reinvent the wheel on. There are a lot of people out there who have put together really excellent toolkits. I think Phrases is a great place to start. And I would say if you're trying to get out there with a particular social media message, to look to your trusted public health organizations and see where they, see what they have in terms of toolkits and start there. And if you're looking to penetrate social media. And then in terms of mainstream media, I think I would need longer to answer, but I'm not quite at the serenity prayer, but again, I think I would need a little bit more time to answer that question. But thank you so much. And Jean, you're less of a dinosaur than I am today, because I didn't even know how to see where the chat was coming in until about 2 seconds ago. I was over here in Zoom and I was like, I don't see any questions.
Thank all of you with all these nice comments saying thank you and whatever. Be sure and take the survey at the bottom, but give us a little props that'll be on the record. We appreciate that. Thank you all for your time and for your participation. Check our website out. The link is there. Check the Phrases website out. And we'll be doing further training on that. Reach out to us. You know where to find us on the network's website. So with that, I think we're over and out.
And we put our emails in the chat box.
Yes.
I got you, Jean. I got you covered.
Yes, that concludes today's session. Please press the button underneath this video feed in Pathable to take the evaluation for this session. If you asked any questions that did not get answered, you can reach out directly to one of the speakers by sending them a message, or you can attend their networking sessions at 3:45 Eastern Time today. Thank you all for attending and have a great rest of your day.
Are we still on together?
We are.
I thought that went well. Boy, we got the timing.
We're still recording.
We are recording. It is recording. They're going to have to cut this part off.
All right. Somebody send the Zoom link.
Stop the recording, I think.
Yeah, I think, I don't know how, oh, here, stop. Okay.